Namaskar, as we say in India. It's a great pleasure to be back here, and it's a great honor to be part of the Silver Jubilee celebration of truly pioneering cochlear implant program in India. And I think great credit to Dr.Gunesh Rajan and his great team of audiologists and rehabilitationists for now, looking after more than 1,400 patients. That's fantastic for India. I mean, that's a great achievement. So, congratulations. Yeah. So, I'll talk about a little passion of ours, of our group, looking at, even though we're doing so much good with the cochlear implant, that's why we're all here. We are totally convinced and passionate about cochlear implantation. There's a few things now, and Rob's already alluded to it, that actually we can get better at what we're doing with implants if we are able to preserve the inner ear as such. And I'll walk you through it, and to make you understand what we have in mind and how we can, from a technical, surgical point of view, and please, audiologists and rehabilitationists, bear with me when I talk about the surgical aspect, but for me as a surgeon, that's the thing I can change when I do the implantation. First of all, all this work I'm presenting to you is the result of a great team I'm fortunate to work with, and that's this team you're seeing here. So they're my PhDs and master students, and some, and also the kind donations from various donors. So why am I talking about this? And the initial challenge we had is we had these patients who had this key-lobe sensory neural hearing loss, and we were long in the belief that these patients were doing fine if you fitted them with hearing aids. But boy, were we wrong, because we know now that these patients were missing out on a lot of our sound and hearing environment. And so the concept of stimulating the part that doesn't hear and combining it with the natural hearing in that ear, evolved. And nowadays, we can implant these patients. We can put in an implant, preserve the residual hearing, and use the implant to really augment the high and mid frequencies in this situation. So this led to a rethinking of how we approach things. And I think now the last decade there's been a big shift of, yes, doing implantation, but also preserving the inner ear at the same time. And inner ear, initially we were talking about hearing preservation, but now it's sort of moved on, because the inner ear is not only the hearing, but it's also the balance. So please keep in mind, as we are now implanting young babies bilaterally in a lot of countries, we have to make sure that we also preserve the whole balance side of things in these babies, and so that we don't know yet, what the long-term outcomes are in these patients that are implanted bilaterally. So the idea is really to preserve the whole cochlear vestibular system. And I want to walk you through the key considerations we keep in mind and try to address. So obviously, as you know, there are a lot of patient factors, a lot of them, and quite a few we are starting to understand the impact, like the impact of the cochlear duct. Obviously that has an impact on our electrode choice, because that has an impact on the insertion depth, which again has an impact on the performance, as we heard. Genetics has an impact. There are certain genetic types which are progressive over time, so we need to factor that in when we choose our electrode. Age has an impact. Also in structure or hearing preservation, because children, and there's quite a few studies showing that, now evidence showing that children have a better preservation outcomes than adults. Another very important area, there's a lot of research in that, is how do we protect the inner ear with pharmacology agents? How can we use medication to help that? Another emerging and probably for us as surgeons, very exciting new possibilities is measuring the trauma to the cochlear by measuring the pressure changes inside the cochlear, because that has a big impact on damage of the critical structures, and I'll talk to you about that. And of course, last but not least, the choice of electrode is subject to a lot of discussion, debate, which could easily fill days of our time. So, gathering all the evidence we have, we've created this structure preservation surgery checklist. This is how we do every implantation, whether there's residual hearing or not, with the idea to maximize the preservation of all the inner ear structures. And what I'll do, I'll go step by step through it and try and show you why we are doing certain things based on the evidence we have at this point in time. So I'll start off with the red highlighted area. That's the otoprotection, the pharmacology. Rob earlier touched that subject. So we use intravenous dexamethasone and intratympanic triamcinolone as first thing after intubation. And then in the end we use some more triamcinolone, which is a depot form, and put that into the mastoid and middle ear. So the basis of that, as I told you, is to provide inner ear protection using medication. And the cheapest and most readily available agent we have in this moment in time are steroids, right? And in steroids, it's very important to know that the type of steroids you use is important, the time you apply it in relation to the actual implantation, and the way you deliver it matters. And just briefly talk about the type of steroids. Going back to your medical school, to basic pharmacology, the steroids, there's glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. And we know, and we learned from the endocrinologists, that we basically just want to use steroids throughout the glucocorticoid effect, because the glucocorticoid effect is hair cell protective and also has an effective protect on the neural elements. On the other hand, the mineralocorticoid effects of steroids has a negative impact on the stria vascularis, which is the powerhouse of the organ of Corti. So we don't want anything to interfere with that. So if you use a steroid that has purely glucocorticoid effects. And that's why the choice of the steroids of the dexamethasone and the triamcinolone. Right? Now the time of delivery is also important, and Rob's also showed that. The Melbourne group has done wonderful work there, that even a one-time delivery before implantation can have a long-lasting effect over months. And interestingly, the longer time there is between the steroid application and the actual insertion, the better the protective effect. So keep that in mind. Ideally, if you're using systemic steroids or transtympanic, and we're running a trial with that, a randomized trial, is giving it the evening before the implantation to maximize the steroid effect. Because keep in mind, as you can see here, steroids go into the transcription factors. So they need time to initiate their effects. They need hours, 8 to 12 hours to have this full effect of their protective qualities. Delivery method, I'll talk about that also. We know now, again, combining all the various studies, we know that the intratympanic application reaches the basal areas of the cochlea very well, and also gets high concentrations into the perilymph, which in turn is good protective element for the organ of Corti and the hair cells. Whereas the systemic application reaches the apical areas very well and has a better protective effect on the neural elements like the spiral ganglions and the nerve sheath. So ideally, a lot of groups now combine the intratympanic and the systemic application to get the complete coverage, steroid coverage, or protective coverage of the cochlea. And this is just some data showing you one of our early studies where we showed the protective effect. I can't see my cursor. Do you have a pointer by anything? Oh yeah, great, thank you. So you see, this is the group. We used the group with the left corner audiogram, and one group got steroids and the other not. And you can see the effect of the steroid prospectively over time with regard to the hearing preservation. So this is one of the early studies we did. And then this is a study, quite old now, I should say 10 years old, but it's been replicated by various groups. And this shows you the effect not only on the hair cells, but also on the spiral ganglion cells, which are a crucial element on how the implant works. They are the mediators of how the implant works. So, and this is also very impressive, but has been reproduced several times. So we now, just keep in mind, to be brief, we can protect the inner ear also pharmacologically. Steroids are now readily available. There will be new agents coming up, but the concept is pretty much the same how they work. Now let's get to this other parts of the checklist. And these are the surgical aspects. You know, the big round posterior tympanotomy. We open the round window membrane underwater, or under in the steroid lake, as we call it. We do a slow insertion, and just by doing a slow insertion, I've got a lot of feedback from various groups all over the world that since they started doing slow insertion, that the rate of complete insertions has increased dramatically. So I think not only has the electrode design had an impact on the possibility to achieve complete insertion, but also the actual slow insertion technique has been quite an important element to this. And if it's a true hearing preservation case, we only insert up to resistance, and we fixate the array even after the electrode's inside, and I'll show you why. So one important thing, that's for me important to take home, and if you take home that the inner ear does not like pressure changes, and I'll demonstrate So Will, one of my master students, has this experimental setup where we can measure the intracochlear pressures in an experimental model and measure it at different times during different positions of the cochlea. And so we did dissect the different steps of how to open the round window. And these are the pressure changes using various techniques of opening the round window. So you can use the needle, you can use the cannula, you can use the lasers, and you can see only that. The difference by making a puncture with the laser into the round window membrane versus a mechanical puncture causes big pressure changes. So ideally, if you look at this, you should all have a laser in the room to do the opening of the round window membrane. But that's not readily available. So what you can do instead is, if you use fluid in the round window niche, basically if you open the round window membrane underwater, you neutralize pressure changes. So we can do that. Everyone can do that, as opposed to having a laser in theater. Everyone has fluid in theater, and ideally we use, nowadays we use the steroid, the dexamethasone, use it there, we do it through the dexamethasone, the steroid lake, as we call it nowadays. So that's the element. So it only starts when you are opening the round window membrane. We haven't even touched the array yet. Okay, this is just opening the round window membrane. And then we opened the round window membrane. Now we've taken the array into our hands, and now we want to insert it. And this is again an important aspect. This is just to demonstrate to you what the role of the insertion speed has on pressure changes again. If you put it in an array, put it in within 30 seconds, you can see the big pressure peak over time. But if you put it in over around 2 minutes, you can minimize the pressure changes. And we're talking about manual insertion, right? With our hands, we are always limited, we surgeons, obviously. Yes? Yes, sorry. Just a second, yes. This is not, yes, I'll get to that. Yes, thank you. So again, with our pressure measurements, we can actually analyze how good we are manually. And we think of this, you saw the straight line before. This looks pretty good. Right? And then you look at it, and this is like a roller coaster. It's like up and down. This is our tremor when we manually insert it, causing pressure changes again of around between equivalent to 40 to 60 decibel pressure change equivalent, right? And this is huge because this is like having an FA-80 flying through your cochlear. Just, it's a very large pressure change, and it demonstrates the equivalent of a noise trauma. And I did this talk before the previous proceedings happening here in India, right? So I'm not biased. So will my master's kid use he created an automated insertion tool and compared that at various, so this is the pressure change at the apex, this is the pressure change at the basal turn. You can simultaneously measure those peaks. And if you go back and look, this is the interesting thing, basal turn, apex. So the moment we insert it, you can feel the measurements also at the apex, not only at the basal turn, right? So this is manually, and then we do it automated. You see the difference. We have eliminated those tremor-related changes, pressure changes. And this is like a paper plane flying through the cochlea, right? So, and then getting to another component, electrode type. These are various array types, from various brands. And looking, and these are the pre-curved, pre-shaped, pre-mold arrays. And what you can see, the lateral wall arrays cause less pressure, and the pre-curved, pre-designed arrays. So you put the electrode in, you're all happy, and then the question now came up. I'm really happy that Manish came up with that, because what happens if you seal versus not seal the electrode, the insertion side, and again, interestingly, if you don't seal the side, you can eliminate the pressure change induced after you mobilize the lead. As if you pack it, you can again induce or be a bit of a catalyst for pressure changes. So, this opens the debate, in round window insertion, whether a seal is required. There's a lot of data, most of the data regarding sealing was done in cochleostomy scenarios, which is a different scenario when it comes to wound healing and risk of meningitis, ossification, fibrosis. So different concepts and pathophysiology. So just keep this in mind, that this debate, to seal or not to seal in a round window insertion, I'm not talking about extended round window insertion, etc. Purely round window insertion is open. And then, as I said, so we've put the electrode in, and then we've done a good job. It's that, it looks good. Electrode is in, and now we start. We have this lead. We had to store in the mastoid bowl the excess lead that we have of the implant. And see now what happens if you do that. Again, you initiate huge pressure changes. And this can be eliminated just by fixating the array as you move the lead into the mastoid. You can hold the array in the posterior tympanotomy, this is one-point fixation, and then store the lead in the mastoid. Just by doing that, you eliminate these big pressure changes. So keep that in mind. The implantation is not over yet. After the insertion of the array, the potential damage could still be inflicted through the maneuver of positioning the lead into the mastoid. So I'll skip this. I just wanted to correlate that with the impact of pressure change. Now, what's the correlate in vivo? And we just did a little study we're thinking of which clinical scenarios simulate or offer the same issue of pressure change in the inner ear. And for us, the most obvious thing is, especially if you're doing pediatric cochlear implantation, is gusher formation. Gusher formation is a rapid change in intracochlear pressure after we open the round window membrane. So we looked at that scenario. What does that have for an impact on the hearing preservation as a surrogate marker of structure preservation? So we looked at our cohort in cochlear, in pediatric patients who had different kinds of cochlear malformations, mainly type 2 variant we published, which a lot of our ES cases or hybrid cases are that in the pediatric population. And we compared them to more complex, basically gusher group. And this is what we found, is that in the malformations where we did not have any gusher formation, the preservation was pretty good, as opposed to the cohort where we had gusher intraoperative. It sounds logical now, but it's like a clinical correlate of what you find in experiments in vitro in the cochlear model. And this is just the same thing over time. The relative hearing loss in the gusher group is significantly higher. Although, the overall impact is not large if you look at the hearing outcomes, interestingly, over time. But that's something we also see in daily life. We experience that in the outcomes in these patients. So I'm only getting to the take-home messages section. I'm happy if you take home that there is pharmacologic ear protection. If you use steroids, only use steroids with glucocorticoid properties, not mixed mineral glucocorticoid properties like fluoromethazone or methylprednisolone. They all have mixed properties. Keep in mind that intratympanic delivery covers the base and provides hair cell organ protection, whereas systemic delivery covers the apical areas and seems to improve the preservation of the neural elements. And very important, of course, also for the safety of our patients. None of the studies, the clinical studies, showed any increase of post-operative infection rates when steroids were used. So that's also very important to know. And there's a quite good group of studies looking into that, animal and in vivo. The other thing, very important for the surgeons, minimize intracochlear pressure changes. When you open the round window, while inserting the electrode, and even after inserting the electrode. Keep that in mind. It's not done with having the electrode in there. How do you open the round window? Do it underwater. Make a big opening into the round window membrane. I didn't show that, but there's data very clearly in the model showing you that. And it makes sense. You're pushing in, the array has a volume, and you're pushing it into the cochlear, which is the fluid-filled confined space. So volume has to escape to minimize pressure change. So making a big round window opening allows the parallel volume to compensate for regress as you're inserting the electrode. How do you insert the electrode? Use a one-point support that minimizes, especially after putting the array in there, it minimizes the potential pressure changes while you store the lead. Use a moist array, as that also reduces. Do it underwater, do it slow, and stop at resistance. So in conclusion, I can say that the combination of pharmacologic inner-ear protection and attention to the intracochlear dynamics, pressure dynamics, are crucial for us to improve our ability to preserve the inner ear in our patients we implant. Thank you for your attention.